we're going to open up the phone, and we have someone on. Caller, go ahead with your question or statement. Yes, okay, caller. I think what you're saying, when does the police have the right to frisk us, or under what standard have the right to, to search you, whether it's just mere suspicion or probable cause? And I'm going to let Tonya address that.
And that's a wonderful question. The Fourth Amendment does give you protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. In that instance, I mean, you need basically at least reasonable suspicion to search anyone. And I don't know all the facts of your circumstances, but it definitely sounds like an unreasonable search has taken place on your private property. Unless the officer saw some crime that was taking place, or felt that, crime was about to take place, and one of you were, the people that was going to commit the crime or did commit the crime, he had no justifiable or reasonable reason to come up, approach you, and search you, unless, of course, you gave consent by him asking, hey, can we search you? And if you give consent, then that's one of the exceptions to having requiring a warrant for any type of search. But short of your consent, it doesn't sound like that was a reasonable search.
Do a person, is there a difference, Tonya, between a search and a pat down? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Frisk?
Usually the pat down is done when there's a suspicion of maybe there being a weapon. If the officer pats you down, he's fearing for his safety, or you tell him, hey, I have a weapon on me, and he pats you down and he gets the weapon, that's a little different, not technically a search. Even if he pats you down and he's looking for a weapon and he feels some, drugs or something like that, he still doesn't have the right to take that out of your pocket unless he knows for absolute certain that that's a drug or some type of contraband within your person.
Let me just say this. It is always, in my experience, to write down officer name and badge, and to give a report on things, situation which you may feel that there was an injustice that was done to you. These type of thing goes on all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't think an officer is up under that much pressure to cross the line in certain situations. He's a usually narcotic or a regular police who feel like he's adequate doing his job, but under the stress and the night time, this was happening at night, I believe, Mr. Wilson, and they think that you're ignorant, that you're not going to do anything about it, and so they take advantage of your rights because they feel like you don't even know your rights. So oftentimes that's an issue of itself. When do that citizen like you and others need to be aware of your rights?
And that's something, Larry, I don't mean to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead. Feel free to.
And I think that's a wonderful platform for the Public Defender's Office to reach out to the community. Educate them on what their rights are and what they can do in certain situations. Because it's just so important for people to know their rights, and have them explained to them. Give them a platform where they can come and ask questions and tell about their experiences in the community, because we need to know these things. We need to understand what's going on. We do have access to the sheriff department, to your local police departments, and we can bring these issues up. We can invite the community in to talk about what's going on, because I think that's one of the biggest problems with what's going on with this police brutality.
Yeah, right.
There's no communication between the community and the police department.
Right. And that is one of the recommendations from a lot of these commissions that have been put together is communication, better training, better tactics. But let me go right into, time goes by so fast, but I want to go into something that I think is concerns a lot of us because we do not know the legal rights that we have involving it, or the legal responsibility when it comes to when is it legal for a cop to kill you. Okay, you had the Ferguson case with Mr. Brown,
yes,
who was shot and killed by an officer, Walter Scott. You had the Gray situation, and now and you have Sterling, the one in Louisiana, and then the other one, Castle up in Minnesota. Those are ones that are public side that you see all the time. But let me tell you something. There are a lot of cases that you do not read about, that you do not hear about, the injustice, the illegal use of lethal force on a person. And for instance, in my hometown, Fort Pierce, you had a young man shot in the back, and not an hour away from that in Palm Bay,
yes,
a good friend of mine, grandson was just shot and killed in the back. So let's move. I want to move into that area, basically charging a police officer with a crime after the death of a civilian is incredibly rare, even when there's video evidence, like in the case of Baton Rouge. And a big part of that is because of the legal standard for when a cop is allowed to use deadly force. What the public sees as crossing the line may not actually break the law. And even the most reliable video might not show an officer actually committing a crime. There are plenty of guidelines for use of force by police, but it often boils down to what the officer believes when the force was used. Yeah. Something that is notoriously difficult to stand.
Basically, what it boils down to is an officer can use deadly force, and we'll talk about deadly force, when he reasonably feels that his life or a life of another is in jeopardy. So that's why you have your classic lines, from some police officers where they say, stop resisting, stop resisting. Try to kind of show that, hey, there's something going on here. Or, he's got a gun or whatever they decide they want to say. I'm not saying in all instances, some of it may or may not be true. But what we see on video, it's appalling and it's sad. Even in the case of here, the one in Louisiana, Mr. Sterling, Alton Sterling. He had a gun in his pocket, but was he threatening an officer with that gun? It's just sad when you start devaluing human life to the point where you take your pistol off your side and you just blast into his chest like that. There's something got to be done, and this is not only a black issue. Mm-hmm. This is a human issue.
Right. What do we really want from the police department? We want justice.
Yes.
We want to be treated the same, and that is, and it's not happening.
Yes.
And where this thing goes, who knows? I think the killing in Dallas was a result of a person who had some mental derangement, but also who was tired and fed up with the situation.
And it's very unfortunate that he decided to turn to violence. The problem with this situation is, as a society, we tend to forget. We move on to the next thing. We don't think about what's going on. It's right there at the moment. We think about Alton Sterling because it's right there at the moment. But the minute they do a coup in Turkey, we forget about what just happened. With Alton Sterling and the rest of what's going on in Dallas and everything. And one thing I always think about, and I listen to Joe Madison a lot of times, and he talk about, we need to have a movement, not a moment, a movement. And a movement takes sacrifice. And we as a people we have to be willing to sacrifice our time, our resources to make change. And until we're ready to actually make change and sacrifice, it's not going to happen.
Tonya, I went to the chief of police and along with another person, and I wanted to see their guidelines as to the standard which police could use force. And let me just read what Lakeland Police guidelines are. You know, when it comes to objective, reasonable standards, the reasonableness of an officer's use of force under the Fourth Amendment requires careful attention to the totality of the facts and circumstances known by the officer prior to using force. And that force could be anything from less than lethal force, it could be an empty hand control type of force, etc. But this is what they're looking for in determining what force, if any, to use. Severity of the crime. Subject is in an immediate threat to safety of officers and others. Whether the subject is actively resisting or attempting to evade arrest by flight. Subject mental and psychiatric history. Subject violent history, if known. Subject combative skills. The nature of the resistance of force used by the subject. The availability of anything to the subject which may be used as a weapon. The subject access to weapons. Innocent bystanders who could be harmed. Duration of the confrontation. The subject's size, his age, his weight, his physical condition. The officer's size, age, weight, physical condition. The environment factors such as physical terrain. Yeah. So there's a lot that's going through the head of an officer in determining what type of force to use. And a lot of times sometimes he only have a few seconds to make that determination.
And think about this, Larry. It goes back to community policing. I would say a lot of those things. If law enforcement is in the community, not just to make arrests, not just for negative contact. If they're in the community for positive things and they're talking to the people who live in this community and they understand, then it's a lot easier to make those determinations.
It lessens the possibility of making a mistake.